Welcome to Planet Geo, the podcast where we talk about our amazing planet, how it works, and why it matters to you. Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Jesse?
Oh man, I'm doing really well. I'm excited for today's episode, to be honest with you. But before we get to that, let's do some brief introductions. You are Chris Bullheis, a nationally recognized earth science teacher from the great state of Michigan.
And you are Jesse Reimank, one of my former students, now a professor of geoscience at Penn State.
And this is Planet Geo, a podcast where we talk about amazing aspects of our planet and why it matters to our everyday lives. So we're talking about Grand Teton National Park.
So hey, Jess, why are the Tetons special to you? What do they mean to you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say that I've been there several times, and mostly as a little kid, though. And then I just flew back last summer, actually, and spent a week with you and your students out there. And that was the first time I'd been to the Tetons in a long time. But coming from Michigan, where it's really flat, I think the Tetons are special to me because they really just represent the idea of the mountains, you know? They are that ideal to me. That's what I think of when I think of the mountains.
Yeah.
I mean, what about you? What's special about the Tetons for you?
Yeah, that's a hard question to narrow down. But the first time I went to the Tetons, I was 6 years old.
Oh, man.
Yeah, my mom and dad took us there. And, driving to the Tetons from Michigan, they're right away, as a 6-year-old, I recognized that these are special. It doesn't matter where you approach the Tetons from. You're just smacked with this stunning view. What I love about them, there's really no introduction to the Tetons. You come around a bend and bam, there they are. And I love
totally
that.
True.
You
totally
don't
true.
get that. And so I never get tired of that. I know when I'm going to get the view, and I'm excited for it every single time, and it never lets me down.
Yeah, last summer when I flew in to meet you and your students there, it's the first time I'd ever flown into Jackson Hole, and my goodness, is that a stunning last half hour of the flight. I wouldn't want to be a pilot landing in this valley, but it is unbelievable. I think we approached from the north and landed, so I was sitting on the perfect side of the plane. The Grand Tetons are out to my right. Oh, it's just unbelievable. Kind of banked in. They just smack you in the face. They're so impressive.
Does. Yeah. So, I've been going there. Like I said, my first time was when I was 6, but then we went back every summer for a few days. I've been going ever since then. And then, I got married to Jenny in 1994 and we honeymooned there. We spent a week in the Tetons.
Oh, man, that's beautiful. What time of year was that?
It was actually right in the middle of summer. Late
Beautiful.
July, early August is when we were there.
Beautiful.
I mean, it wasn't even a question like, where do you want to go for your honeymoon? Let's go to the Tetons. And, now I take 26 students there every summer to learn and to hike.
Yeah. So you guys have hiked like all over. I mean, how many of the peaks have you bagged?
I've done, thinking back now, so Buck Mountain, Static Peak, the South, the Middle. Yeah, we haven't done the Grand.
Why is that? Why not the Grand?
Yeah, I think the Grand, my wife, she really doesn't like exposure too much. And there's a fair amount of exposure no matter what direction you try to tackle the Grand.
Getting on some knife edges, huh? On the way up there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I don't know. Maybe you and I someday will just decide we're going to do the Grand.
Yeah, all right, let's do it. Put it on the bucket list. Let's go do it. Hell yeah.
You got it.
Okay, well, let's get into it here. But before we do, we want you all to have a visual image of the Grand Teton National Park in mind. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stop this podcast quick and click on a link that we put in the episode description. Now that you got that link open, when you're looking at that photo, you are seeing geoscience features that represent about 2.8 billion years, that's 3/5 of Earth history, just in that one photo. So it's a spectacular photo, a beautiful mountain range, and it contains a spectacular amount of geoscience information in it. And we're going to go through that, starting with how the rocks formed.
Let's talk about like the rocks that these mountains are made of.
Yeah, let's do it. So at the roots of the Tetons are what's called these metamorphic gneisses. And gneiss is spelled Gneiss. That's how us geologists, use the term gneiss. These are really old rocks, 2.73 billion year old rocks. Very typical, very similar to the rocks I study up in northern Canada. I've never really studied the ones in the Tetons. I'd love to, though. But they kind of form the base of all this stuff. They're kind of down deep in the middle. And I was really struck by this when we were hiking last summer. We were doing, I forget what hike it was, Chris. Which hike was the long one we did? Paintbrush Divide, is that right?
No, it wasn't
Or Avalanche
Paintbrush
Peak,
Divide.
maybe,
It was
or...
Lake Solitude that we were doing.
Oh, yeah, that's the one.
Cascade Canyon, yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah. So the fact, you got to remember this because it's hilarious. I took the kids to this map. They have this 3-dimensional map. And it's awesome. And I was pointing out where we're going to go and all that. And Jenny, my wife,
down by the trailhead, right? This 3-dimensional map.
Right. So I'm pointing out where we're going to go, and Jenny couldn't see, so she squeezes up in front, and she's cutting in front of you. She cuts in front of you, which pissed you off. So, while she was paying attention to me pointing out what was going on, you stuffed a big rock in her backpack. Must have weighed about 10 pounds. She had no idea. And so great.
I got one of your big farm boy students to help me put some rocks in her backpack. Oh man, we loaded them up. That was awesome.
Yeah. So we get to the lake, and us three are sitting around eating lunch. We start digging into our backpacks to get lunch, and she's rooting through it. And she's like, "What the heck is going on? I got these big rocks." So she hauled them all the way up to the top.
Oh man, she earned her beer that night because she hauled like 20 pounds of rocks, and they were not pretty rocks. These were ugly rocks too. These are ugly ass rocks.
No, they were ugly. They were leverite, but it couldn't have happened to a better person. She deserved everything that she carried up.
She totally deserved it. Oh man, she cut right in front of me up front. That pissed me off. So I had to take it out on her a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, so on the way down, I think I was in the back of the pack. A bunch of students were up front. I was just kind of looking around, thinking, and the sun was setting. We had just had a little thunder shower pass over. The sun was lighting up the north face of that valley. And the rocks are so complicated. They're really folded. They look like toothpaste. There's just squished toothpaste. And I was really struck by, that's what a metamorphic gneiss is. This thing that looks like it's just been twisted and mangled. It's the steel in a car after a car wreck. Yeah. And most of the continental crust looks like that, right? That is just what makes up most of what's under our feet at depth. And I was just really struck by that because it's really pretty stuff. I find it scientifically extremely interesting.
I'm just saying that gneiss is one of the prettiest rocks that exists, in my opinion.
Totally.
I can't have enough of it in my yard.
Yeah, people use it for countertops all the time. It's beautiful stuff. It's got these white bands that are kind of wrapped around, darker bands. Oh, it's beautiful. It's scientifically incredibly interesting as well, but
we're talking about this from the standpoint, like, we're going to work in order. Okay. So we're talking about the oldest rocks that exist in the park. It's this metamorphic gneiss. It's highly messed up, contorted, subjected to massive amounts of heat and pressure. Where did this rock form, Jesse?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an open question. These rocks are around 2.7 billion years old. And some people believe that these rocks were formed when plate tectonics really started on Earth. So a lot of people think that these rocks formed in a subduction zone. So something similar to the west coast of the United States right now. Think of Mount St. Helens, or think of Yosemite National Park, or think of Italy, a modern subduction zone going on there. But these rocks have a really tortured life. They're really deformed. They're metamorphosed many times, subjected to high pressures and high temperatures. So it's not entirely clear where they formed and how they formed. And this is a part of active research for me personally. So I could go on and on and on for hours about it, but I won't belabor that.
So one of the interesting things about the gneiss, and I want you to talk about this because you're the nice guy, okay, is a lot of this stuff has garnets in it or magnetite crystals in it that have like these, they look like eyes. You have these white halos that surround these dark colored garnets and magnetite crystals. What's going on with that?
Oh yeah. So you can often see these things, right? So garnets are like a little deep red, kind of ruby red color, even darker than that. And then magnetites are going to be these really dark crystals that you can sometimes see. And they'll have these little light-colored rims around them. And really what this is like metamorphism in action. This is a rock being turned into a different type of rock. This is crystals forming under high pressure, high temperature, where the elements can move around within the rock even though it's not melted. So this is solid state.
They become very soft, right?
Yeah, they become
like
super
hot
soft.
Plastic.
hot plastic. That's the perfect analogy. It's hot plastic. And when you have that, elements, individual atoms, can move around in the crystal structure more freely, more rapidly. And so what happens is when you start to form a garnet, it basically pulls, garnet has a lot of iron, has a lot of magnesium in it, and it basically pulls iron and magnesium from all the little mineral grains around it. So you kind of deplete the area around that of iron and magnesium.
Which
and
are dark colored minerals, right? So this makes sense then. So you have these white halos around these dark crystals. When these things were forming, they were basically stealing those dark colored constituents and using it to grow the magnetite and garnet, right?
Exactly. And one of the best examples of this is a a little camping trip that we went on like a decade ago, probably, to Gore Mountain up in upstate New York, where we have these huge garnets. I mean, they're like softball sized garnets with these massive depletion halos around the edges. They're beautiful.
Oh, do you remember that?
That was a great trip.
We were giddy with excitement.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
Young and dumb and extremely excited to see some big garnets and some
but they were as big as a baby's head. These things.
We showed up, and the owner was just like, "Oh yeah, come on down to the pit." Where they're like, they're quarter.
We thought we were gonna get yelled at so bad.
Yeah. We pulled up. We're like, "Oh, we're gonna get kicked out of here." He's like, "Oh yeah, come down to the pit." I mean, they're mining this stuff. They're like sectioning it for amazing countertops, like some of the best countertops I've ever seen.
Well, so all right, this is funny because when you guys got out, I was off somewhere else, and the owner comes ripping up in his Chrysler 300. Yeah, and we think, oh, this is not going to end well. We're going to get yelled at. And you right away call me, hey, Mr. Bullheis, can you come over here and talk?
Guys, can you be in charge over here, please?
Piece of work. Yeah, throw me right into the bus.
That's right.
It worked out though. That was good stuff.
So anyway, it's the same process, right? It's the same thing. These depletion halos. To be honest, Chris, I don't really remember seeing these. Are there good places to see these depletion halos? Certain hikes that you can see them at?
Yeah, you can see this metamorphic gneiss, and it's kind of hit and miss where you're going to see these halos, but this gneiss is all over the place up in Paintbrush Canyon, going up over to, if you can go up over Paintbrush Divide and then back down the backside to Lake Solitude. Death Canyon is another really popular hike in the park. Death Canyon, and you take that up and you can take an offshoot up to Static Peak. These rocks in those three really popular places in the park are really abundant and good places to see these halos and so on.
So if you're planning a trip to Grand Teton National Park, go to those places. You can marvel at some really ancient rocks, beautiful rocks.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Jess, let's move on.
Yeah, what's the next step in our geologic history here?
Well, so we in geology we always have to work from the beginning to the end, right? We have to work from the oldest to the youngest, and so we talked about this metamorphic gneiss, and then following that up is this much lighter colored granite. It's stark contrast to the dark grays and almost black and browns of the metamorphic gneiss. And it's interesting too that some of this granite is a rock that we call pegmatite, which means it's really, really coarse grained. The minerals are huge. And so it gets its own textural term.
Many of you listening will probably have countertops made of this stuff as well.
Yes.
If you have big white crystals, big pink crystals in your countertop, it's a pegmatite.
Yeah. And so this granite you can see really in the central high peaks, like the Grand and the Middle Teton. That's where this rock really shows up in abundance. The highest peaks in the central part of the range. So this rock is about 2.5 billion years old. And then you get to another really important rock that is prominent. And a lot of people pull off alongside the road and take pictures of this because it's one of these obvious features that stands up and smacks you in the face. This really black rock that just cuts right through Mount Moran, which is on the northern part of the range.
So Mount Moran is the one that kind of has the flatter peak. It's a little bit blockier shaped, right? And it has this big black stripe running through it, kind of vertically running through it.
Yeah, and it's really kind of cool because it gives perspective, I think, that black rock that's cutting through there is about 150 feet thick. And when you're standing there, looking at the east face of Mount Moran, it just doesn't look like it's 150 feet thick. And it's just a testament to the sheer magnitude.
Yeah, it's a little pencil stripe that somebody's put on there, but it's massive. So that the age of that thing, that's actually pretty young. That's about 800 million years old, quote unquote young relative to other stuff. It's about 800 million years old. And actually, this is an interesting thing. One of my PhD supervisors dated a whole bunch of samples from some of this stuff, and this is a huge event. There's loads of these mafic dikes, these black veins, all the way up to the Yukon Territory in Canada. And this is an event that was formed with some magmatism that was related to continental breakup. So when North America broke apart from Australia in China, when the Pacific Ocean kind of started to form, we had a lot of magma that was pushing up, and this little stripe on Mount Moran is related to that kind of event. So it's really an impressive piece to the history of our continent right there.
Yeah, it is. That's really cool. And the other thing too, I want to real quick point it out. I've climbed the Middle Teton a few times, and going up to Garnet Canyon, which is right at the base of the Middle Teton, there's a much smaller black dike that cuts right through the middle of the Middle Teton, and it goes all the way through to the other side too. Just they're all over the place in the Tetons. Those I think are just probably the two most famous. Eventually, this granite, these black dikes and the metamorphic gneiss were all exposed at the surface of the earth, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
They're exposed at the surface of the earth, and we know this because this is the next part of the story. When this stuff eventually got exposed at the surface, the erosion took this straight down to sea level, and so I want you to picture what this looks like at the time. Where we're at in this story, it doesn't even remotely resemble what the Tetons look like today. To me, and Jesse, you correct me if I'm wrong because you've spent more time there, but this is more like the central part of Canada, or the Hudson Bay, for instance. Yep. Where you have this, the Canadian Shield with these super old rocks exposed at the surface, but the Hudson Bay is dropping off sedimentary rocks on top of them.
That's right. I mean, these are like, the sand on the beach, there's rock underneath your feet. There's actually continent underneath your feet, but there's sand on top of it. And there's a bunch of sediment being deposited right on top of it too.
Right. So we had this immense period of time where this area was either just above sea level, just below sea level, at sea level, and sedimentary rocks were being deposited. In fact, the oldest sedimentary rock in the park is called the Flathead Sandstone. And it is that sandstone, that kind of light brown sandstone that you see on top of Mount Moran. Right on top of that black igneous rock that cuts across Mount Moran. To back up and just summarize real quick, is that it was a long time where we had this sea depositing sedimentary rocks. And it's an impressive amount of sedimentary rock. We're talking thousands of feet. So that's where we're at, right? That's right. Where we are in our story right now, is we have this massive accumulation of sedimentary rocks from a sea that was there for a long period of time.
And so, but then, we're kind of done with the sort of rock formation of part of the story, but how do we get to the mountains? We got to get to the mountains at some point, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
And one important thing to note is that they're really young, aren't they? I mean,
yeah, they are.
Most of the Rocky Mountains, as we know them, kind of became mountains. They got pushed up about 50 million years ago, or even older than that. The Tetons, however, they went through that period as well, but the Tetons as we see them today are much, much younger. They kind of started around 15 million years ago, 13 million years ago, and they're still continuing to be uplifted. So they're really active. And this is a feature that is not common in the Western U.S.
It's kind of, so the interesting thing about this, Jesse, is that because the Tetons are so young, they're engaged in this classic struggle in the geoscience world. There are two forces that lift things up and forces that wear things down. And, the force that lifts things up is related to tectonics. We've talked about that in earlier episodes. And then you have the force that wears things down, which is weathering and erosion. And right now, the Tetons are actively rising, and yet erosion is relentlessly grinding them down. And when the Tetons stop rising, the powers of weathering and erosion will take over. Think about this a second. we said the Rocky Mountains are much older. Most of the Rocky Mountains are much older. The forces that lift them up is done. That event is not going on anymore. So the only thing that's happening to them, well, they're being affected by weathering and erosion predominantly.
That's right. So they're getting knocked down. Slowly but surely getting knocked down, right?
The Tetons, they're a restless mountain.
Yeah.
The Tetons they're not formed by volcanic mechanisms or anything like that. These mountains are formed by seismic disaster.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, the reason that they are so spectacular and the reason they're more stunning than other parts of the Rocky Mountains is that they're the front line, really, of this battle, this uplift versus weathering and erosion, knocking down battle. It's a totally dynamic place, and it's a place that you can see these two forces in action, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I've witnessed this many times in the backcountry, and there are certain canyons where it just seems to happen more often than in other places in the park. But when you hear rock fall coming off some of these major peaks and you're in the backcountry, it always catches me off guard. The sound, the sight, it's so amazing. You have these, tons and tons of rocks just break loose and come crashing down the valleys, and they'll slam into other boulders that have already made their journey down, and they explode when they hit each other. It's just an impressive sound.
So what's the closest call you've ever been in? Have you ever been close to one of these rock slides or rock falls?
Not really in the Tetons and Mount Shasta in California, somewhat close because the way up in there it's a chute and it's like a bowling alley, there's nowhere to go.
Right.
But in the Tetons, no, I haven't really been close to anything. It's just that it goes back to, again, how restless these mountains are.
Yeah, that's right. And all this restlessness really started when the Rocky Mountains started to form. That's about 60 million years ago or so. And they started to form because a subduction zone was going on the west coast of North America. This is the same subduction zone that makes the Cascade Mountains now. And this subduction kind of compressed things a little bit, and it started to lift up the Rocky Mountains and the interior of the continent. And then that uplift stopped, and we stepped forward in time to get to the modern.
Nothing like they do today, though.
Yeah, that's right. And exactly. They didn't look anything like that. And then we stepped forward in time to get to what the modern representation of the Tetons to what we see today.
Yeah, so the Rocky Mountains, that whole event, which was from 50 to 60 million years ago, that was compression. That was a compressional event, and it's kind of like what happens if you take one of those paper fans that you probably made in elementary school, or like an accordion that you squeeze together, right? That's the compression that you get.
Right.
And then 15 million years ago, this switched to a tension, which is a pulling apart kind of event, and it's like
Let's focus on that. I mean, tension, the word tension, we often think of it, with like personality tension or something. But when we're talking about tension, it's actually pulling apart, or in a way it's pulling apart. Right?
Yeah, the way I think of it is if I have one end of a rope and you have another, and I say, Jesse, put tension on this rope. And you know what to do. And if I say put more tension on it, you're going to pull harder on that rope.
Right.
And that's what's going on here. But it's like this. If you take that fan, that paper fan, and set it down on a table, then it just simply relaxes, right? So when this compression event from the Rockies is done, that force is over with. Now these compressed, folded, and contorted rocks are going to begin to relax.
Right. So this tension, we sort of smash things together. Everything gets really thick. Then you relax it. And some parts of the crust drop down more. So you kind of create these mountain ranges because some pieces are dropping down more than others in a way.
Right. Yep. So that's one thing that's going on. And then, of course, we have the Yellowstone hotspot also that's associated with this whole thing, the timing of which cannot be ignored.
That's right. So revisit episode 3 to hear more about the Yellowstone hotspot.
Right,
but the Yellowstone hotspot also impacts the Grand Teton National Park in a really kind of dramatic way.
Yeah, because, the Tetons really didn't kick into high gear in terms of, the amount of uplift that's going on until, really ramping up about 2 million years ago. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, you have the tension of this accordion, if you will. 2, you have the Yellowstone hotspot that is very nearby right now. because the Yellowstone hotspot has moved for the previous 15 million years. And now it's just north of where the Tetons are today. And then 3, and this is really important, faults formed when the Rocky Mountains were actively rising, and all that rock was thrown into this major folds and faults and so on.
Faults are where rock is breaking. Folds are where we're bending rock. Faults, a lot of people can, think of the San Andreas Fault. There's this like kind of line in the ground, right? But it's actually where rock is breaking. And it's a really dramatic event when rocks break.
Well, this was a major fault that happened, and it forms then a pre-existing weakness. And so if you take the pre-existing weakness and combine it then with the tension that's now going on due to the relaxing of the rocks and the Yellowstone hotspot, where does it break? It breaks where it was already broken.
That's right. It's kind of the opposite of, when you break your bones. If you break your bone, it usually heals back strongly. But rocks are the opposite. If you break it somewhere, it's probably going to break there again. If you put either the same stress or a different type of stress on that joint, it's going to break at that same location. Yep. So we're reactivating these faults. This is resulting in this spectacular rise of the Tetons. If you do any, even a day hike in the Tetons, you're kind of walking basically on the fault surface. So you're walking on where this rock face broke. And I remember, when I was on your summer science trip, and I think it was 2004, we did this hike, right? We did the Lake Solitude hike.
No, it was Amphitheater Lake. We did
Amphitheater Lake. Okay.
Yep.
We did Amphitheater Lake, and the way back down is just kind of switch. Well, the way up is switch backing up, but on the way back down, you can kind of focus a little bit more because it's easier. But you're kind of switch backing down this beautiful mountain face, right? And that's effectively the former fault.
It is
of the Grand Tetons.
Yep.
You remember this? You remember this hike?
I do. I remember it really well, actually. So, all we did, you and I walked together. The rest of the group was ahead of us. And by the time
a couple geology nerds, thinking about rocks the whole time,
oblivious to everything else going on around us.
That's right. Oh, beautiful butterflies, but who cares? Whatever. Let's look at the rocks.
Oh, a bear could have walked right across the trail. We would not have cared. We wouldn't have noticed.
That's right.
So we were walking on the way down, and all you did was. Well, by the time we'd gotten down, you pieced together the entire geologic story as we're laying it out right now, in terms of how the Tetons formed. And all I did to you was just ask you questions. You have to look at the rocks. Okay. Well, what groups of rocks do we see, right? Well, we see 4 groups of rocks. We see the gneiss, we see the granite, we see these black dikes cutting across, and then we see these sedimentary rocks. Those are the 4 groups of rocks. Now we got to put them in order.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what came first, second, third, fourth, and so on? And then what else happened then? Now that we have the rocks in order, what else must have happened to get us to what the Tetons look like today? And it was amazing. I'm going to give you a compliment.
No. All right. Let me get prepared for it. Let me get emotionally ready for a compliment.
It was impressive that by the time I'd never had a student that was able to see geology the way you do.
Well,
you were able to piece it together.
Well, I really appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. But I'd also never had a teacher who was willing to put up with these annoying questions from a 17-year-old for 3 hours on a hike. I learned a ton on that trip, and really that hike in particular. I'll always remember it as a transformational event in my life, in the sense of you showed me how cool it is to be able to go on a hike for like 3 hours, look at the rocks around you, and come to this understanding of what that piece of the earth went through for the past, 3 billion years. I mean, it's an astonishing thing to be able to do.
It is. And it's very difficult. The grandeur of it all is really hard to wrap your mind around.
Let's go back to the picture that we put in. When you're sitting there looking at that the Grand Teton mountain range, you are looking at the face of this fault. And the way to think about this is really to think about, many of you like sat in restaurants or something, and you see like the double-sided hinge doors in a restaurant kitchen, like going into the kitchen from the restaurant. They've usually got these like double hinge swinging doors. If two people are on opposite sides of that door, on the right side, you got somebody coming out carrying food, somebody going in carrying dishes. Those doors are hinging in opposite directions. That's basically what's going on here. As this tension, as you pull apart the crust, one part of the crust is swinging down, and it's swinging, opening down into the earth, and another part is
Jackson Hole. So when this happens, Jackson Hole hinges and swings down toward the mountains. At the same time, the east face of the Tetons is thrust upward and back towards the west. So they're swinging in opposite directions, which is why, Jackson Hole is called Jackson Hole, because every time there's a seismic disaster in the area, Jackson sinks more and the Tetons are simultaneously thrust upward.
That's right. So if you're trying to picture this, think of it, you're looking at a map, north is up, Jackson Hole is swinging down, the hinge is to the right, and this is your kitchen door. The hinges swinging down, the Tetons on the left side are swinging up and out towards you, which is up in this view. So this is happening like at a fairly rapid rate in the Tetons right now, so that there's a fault zone where the rocks are actually breaking. And in the last 15,000 years since the last ice age, it's changed about 60 feet. So that's like 4 feet per 1,000 years, which is geologically, it doesn't sound very much to us, but geologically that's pretty rapid.
And this is capable of knocking off, pretty significant displacement in one of these seismic disasters. I mean, you can have more than 20 feet of displacement in one event. Can you imagine,
Oh man.
being in the Tetons, in the backcountry, or on a cliff face or something when this seismic disaster breaks and the Tetons are shoved up 20 feet relative to Jackson Hole that just sank.
Yeah.
Wow.
It'd be a terrifying. It'd be both awesome and terrifying at the same time. But if we look under Jackson Hole, there's a load of sediments. I mean, there's thousands of feet of sediments because this hinged door has gone down for a long time, and it's gone down quite a ways. Right?
So look, that flathead sandstone is 5,000 feet above the valley floor. That same layer of sandstone is 25,000 feet below Jackson Hole. So that means Teton fault is 30,000 feet of displacement.
It's huge. 30,000 feet. I mean, it's like 5-6 miles of movement along this fault in the last about 15 million years or something.
Yep.
That's a serious fault.
It is. So this process, this is still going on. They're still uplifting, but the Tetons still don't look like they look today. Okay, we have not gotten to what makes them so carved and so cut up and so jagged and beautiful. And much of that has to do with the Ice Age.
That's right. I mean, the ruggedness of these mountain ranges is really kind of a glacial feature, right? I mean, these things are produced by ice action on rock.
Okay, so Jesse, let's talk a little bit about some of these glacial features that just dominate the landscape in the Tetons. Some famous places in the park, like Lake Solitude. You hike up Cascade Canyon. Well, first of all, you're hiking up this massive U-shaped valley, and
it's a very self-explanatory kind of term, right?
It looks like a big feed trough, and rivers don't carve valleys like this. So when glaciers go down a valley, they tend to widen it and straighten it out. And you end up with this very distinctive U-shaped valley. So you hike up this incredible U-shaped valley up to Lake Solitude, and you're standing in this amphitheater then when you get to the lake. And, you look around and it's almost like an ice cream scoop right out of the mountainside. It's literally just to
That's
me.
Right.
I look.
It's a great description.
This would be like one of the best concert venues on the planet. The acoustics have got to be phenomenal in this. It's just anyway. You have this amphitheater, this bowl-shaped depression up there. Then that's called a cirque.
And the cirque is formed because you're sort of building up ice and snow on the sides and on the steep sides, and they're all kind of tumbling down towards the center, right? And then they kind of gather in the center and form a bigger glacier. So you kind of get this like scouring out a round feature there. Right.
And at the base of a cirque, you often get this glacial lake that's called a tarn. That's Tarn. You know, Lake Solitude is a cool one. Amphitheater Lake. That's where that's where you and I walked down, and you put together the Geology of the Tetons as a 17-year-old little nerd. You know, like, but same thing though. It's just an incredible cirque up there with this gorgeous glacial lake there. With, you know, and the Grand Teton playing backup. It's just, it's incredible.
Amazing.
It really is. There's so many of these features and so on that are, I think, pretty like accessible. Another U-shaped valley is Death Canyon. You know, you don't have to be a professional rock climber or a massive backpacker to enjoy the beauty of these things. You can just be somebody that would prefer to sit out on a porch and drink a beer and gaze at these mountains. I mean,
that's right. Yeah, you don't have to be Chris Boyce and his family 3 weeks of backpacking, you know, in July. No, you can drive up from your car and go on like an hour-long little jaunt through the forest, and you can see some stunning geoscience stuff. I mean, really stunning stuff.
I mean, I want to be really clear on this. Actually, one of my favorite things to do is grab a camp chair and find a lake and with a cooler full of nice little beverages and just do nothing all day long but stare at these mountains and watch people walk by. And
it's amazing. Yeah, so, I mean, you can sit there and just ponder for hours and hours and hours, especially if you got a beer in your hand. Yeah, so I guess that's a wrap with the Grand Teton National Park. And you know, in summary, get out there, check it out. You know, if you haven't been there before, go check it out. If you have been there before, go to some of the places that we've talked about that you maybe haven't been. I know there's a whole list of things that I want to go, and I'm going to drag Chris Bullheis along to get me on a tour of some of the hiking and climbing in Grand Teton National Park. And hopefully I'm going to get some students and start doing some research on these gneisses because they're pretty cool.
Yeah, I just want to say one of the things that I hope you got out of this podcast is that the next time you're there or the first time you're there, because you've learned a little bit more about how they formed and how they came to be, and that you will appreciate them more. You know, we can't think about words we don't know. And so the more we know, the more we're able to think about and contemplate. And
totally. It's another lens to put on. So when you're walking around the Tetons, when you're driving past them, put on your Planet Geo lens and look at them through this Planet Geo lens where, you know, these are awesome. They tell us a story. They're stunning. They're beautiful. And with that, if you're out there, out in the Tetons, and you have questions, hit us up. We're at planetgeocast@gmail.com, and all of our social medias on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are at Planet Geocast.
Yeah, keep the feedback coming.